Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you and the ranking member for holding this important hearing. And Mr. Bernanke, thank you very much for your thoughtful comments. Mr. Bernanke, I would like to discuss with you three issues. Number one, do you have a concern about the growing income inequality in the United States of America today? The fact that we have, by far, the most unequal distribution of wealth and income of any major country on earth. The fact that the richest 1% own more wealth than the bottom 90%, that the richest 13,000 families earn almost as much income as the bottom 20 million American families, the fact that the middle class is shrinking, poverty is increasing, while the gap between the rich and the poor grows wider. I'd like you to comment on that in a moment. My second question deals with the federal deficit. We have had a number of record-breaking deficits, of course, in recent years, and you and the chairman and ranking member have highlighted the long-term problems, which I certainly agree with. But in the midst of all of these deficits, the President of the United States has pledged to make all of his tax cuts permanent, including those to millionaires and billionaires at the time when the wealthiest people in America have never had it so good. Over the next 4 calendar years, the cost of the tax cuts for the top 1% of households with average incomes of over $1 million will total nearly $350 billion. If the President's tax cuts had made permanent, households with annual incomes of more than $1 million, a group that comprises 0.3%, wealthiest 0.3%, would receive approximately $648 billion in tax cuts over the next decade. So my question to you is, could you speak to us about the wisdom, quote unquote, of the President's policies of continuing to give mammoth tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country who have never had it so good, and in the process significantly driving up our national debt? Third issue I'd like you to comment on briefly is our trade policy. As you know, our trade deficit is on track to exceed $800 billion in 2006, and we now have a record-breaking $900 billion current account deficit. There are a number of us in Congress, I think a growing number of Americans, who are now catching on that our current unfettered free trade policy has not only been a disaster in terms of the loss of millions of good-paying manufacturing jobs, but it is a disaster in terms of long-term economic trends when you run up record-breaking trade deficits year after year after year. In your view, given the fact that we have lost millions of good-paying manufacturing jobs, given the fact that we may be losing, or on the cusp of losing, millions of good-paying information technology jobs as a result of unfettered free trade, given the fact that our manufacturing base is virtually collapsing, do you think it is time to perhaps rethink the current trade policies that we have? Those are the areas that I would very much appreciate your commenting on.
Thank you, Senator. Those are all very important issues. On inequality, it is certainly true that the degree of inequality in our economy has been rising. It's been going on for a long time, and we now have greater income inequality than many other industrial countries.
Is there any other country in the world, major country?
There are some, but
major countries?
Brazil.
Okay. Brazil, yeah.
Anyway, I think it's very important. I think it's an important issue. First of all, it's part of, I think, of the American ethos that we want to have everyone to have opportunity, economic opportunity, and good economic standard of living. I think it's important also for political reasons in the following sense, that our growth and our dynamism depends in an important way on the willingness of the general population to support flexible labor markets, for example, to support the effects of trade on the economy. I think if people are starting to believe that trade, for example, doesn't benefit them personally, that they may become less willing to support trade, and that, from my perspective, is a concern. So it's a very large topic. I hope to give some remarks on this fairly soon about some of the causes and responses to it.
But it is an issue. The fact that we have such a huge gap between the rich and the poor and the decline.
Yes, it is certainly an issue. It's something that would be good to address. I would just reiterate that it's a very long-term trend. It's not something that happened yesterday. And trying to understand it is something economists have been spending a lot of time on, and it'd be interesting to think further about it. On the federal deficit and the tax cut, as I said, I'm not going to support or defend or oppose specific tax or spending measures. With tax cuts, you face the usual trade-off. Lower taxes tend to improve incentives. They tend to generate more efficiency and more growth.
But you've just mentioned a moment ago what I think most economists agree, that tax breaks do not pay for themselves. And my question is, if you give hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks to the wealthiest people who really don't need it, which drives up the deficit, I have a hard time understanding how that makes any sense at all. Could you help me on that?
Well, to the extent that, and there's disagreement, but to the extent that the lower marginal rates create additional effort, additional work, additional productivity, additional innovation, they will create a broader growth in the overall economy, and maybe it's worth it. I'm just saying there's a balance of issues here. On the one hand, you've got the progressivity issue, which you're referring to. On the other hand, you have the questions of whether the tax code is promoting growth. May I suggest that there are many ways to increase progressivity. Another way to do it would be to broaden the base. There are a number of deductions, for example, exemptions, exclusions in the tax code which are not capped and which benefit higher income people more than lower income people. That's another way to look at it. So there are many different ways to think about how to address progressivity issues. But in doing so, you should think also about what are the implications for economic growth and efficiency. And on the trade deficit, this ties in very well to the debate we're having today in this meeting. The fundamental source of our trade imbalance is that we as a country are saving much less than we are investing, and therefore we have to borrow the difference abroad, whereas other countries are saving more than they're investing, and therefore they're lending to us the difference. And that is the essence of the imbalance that we have in the world today. The response to that is complex, but clearly trying to improve our fiscal position, trying to reduce deficits, which all else equal, and it's a complicated issue.
Let's get back to the question, if we could, sir. I mean, we have an $800 billion trade deficit. We've lost millions of good-paying manufacturing jobs, all of which leads myself and many millions of Americans to believe that NAFTA, PNTR with China, et cetera, are not working particularly well for the American people. Comment?
I don't agree with that. I think that there are certainly people and workers who are displaced, who lose from trade. But broadly speaking, I think trade and openness is good for the economy. It creates broader opportunities for growth and investment.
I don't mean, we just have a limited amount, so forgive me.
Sure.
You've given me the rhetoric, but the fact is you're concerned about deficits. That's why you're here today, right? We have an $800 billion trade deficit. Is that a concern?
Well, the deficit we've been talking about is the fiscal deficit.
Well, but you have a trade deficit. That's also of concern.
It is a concern. It is a concern. I don't think it comes from our trade policies. I think it comes from our saving and investment policies. So I think...
You don't think our trade deficit comes from our trade policies?
No, I don't.
You don't think a $200 billion trade deficit with China and the fact that it's hard to buy an American product?
Very, very marginally. And I would also like to say that I think it's really a bit of an exaggeration to say that the U.S. industrial base is decaying. In fact, we just got good industrial production numbers yesterday. The United States is the largest manufacturing country in the world. Our manufacturing output is growing. We have some of the best high-tech manufacturing industries in the world. The main reason that manufacturing jobs have declined so quickly is perversely because manufacturing has been so productive that firms have found ways to make do with fewer and fewer workers, and that has led to a smaller number of workers in manufacturing. But I don't think it's the trade issue. I think in that particular case, it's the productivity issue. I do believe that the best way to address the current account deficit is for a balanced adjustment, for us to increase our saving, both at the household level and at the fiscal level, and for countries like China.
But isn't it hard for the average household to increase their savings when in many cases the jobs they now have are paying lower wages than what they had 20 years ago? All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let me just intercede if I can, because we're a little past the senator's time. We'll go back to another.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Go to Senator Allard.
Dr. Bernanke, welcome to the committee.
Thank you.
I had always operated